Rancher lived alone for years until the Bigfoot left a baby at his door. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from today? And once the story is over, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. A baby giant footprints and the silence of the forest. Late winter in Montana, when thick fog wraps around a lone wooden ranch nestled deep among the pine trees, everything is swallowed by a bone-chilling silence so heavy it takes your breath away. The rancher opens his door, his breath turning to smoke in the biting cold air. Right before him, resting quietly on the snow-covered doorstep, is an old wicker basket. Inside, a tiny baby sleeps peacefully. Beside the basket, enormous footprints are pressed deep into the snow, leading straight into the ancient forest, where only shadows and secrets wait. He's used to living alone, but never prepared for a mystery larger than any story he's ever heard. Now, in the midst of this cold and solitude, he must decide, will he embrace this unexplainable gift or turn his back on it? Have you ever faced something you just couldn't understand? Recall that moment and join me as we step into this story. He thought he was used to solitude until that morning. A thick fog wrapped around the weathered wooden ranch, while the weak light of dawn slipped gently through the gaps in the pine needles, casting soft, blurred streaks across the cold snow. The rancher stood on the porch, gripping his axe. Each steady chop against the hard wood echoed like the slow heartbeat of a man long accustomed to living alone. Suddenly, from beyond the gate, a strange sound broke the silence, not the wind nor the familiar footfalls of someone he knew. It was an unfamiliar broken noise, like a signal announcing something that didn't belong to this quiet world. He stopped, eyes narrowing as he listened closely. Inside, a mix of curiosity and unease began to rise, a feeling foreign yet impossible to ignore. Have you ever heard a sound that made you pause, look around with a strange blend of fear and wonder? Solitude was no longer his only companion. Something was drawing near, and it would change his life forever. Part 1. The Strange Encounter. The winter mist still clung tightly to every pine needle, blanketing the front yard in a delicate veil of cold, like a thin, silvery curtain draped over everything. The old wooden steps, soaked with years and biting winds, were now dressed in a layer of glistening snow. Tiny footprints barely marked the fresh snow, but right beside them, a massive footprint was deeply pressed into the earth, the trace of a creature most believed existed only in legend. The rancher stepped outside, his sharp eyes narrowing like a razor as they fixed on the ground. The cold wind swept through his thick leather jacket, lifting the few strands of silver hair at his temple. By the door lay a wicker basket, tilted slightly as if hastily set down. The soft clinking of the cords rubbing together in the chill air added to the stillness, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting. He bent down, hands trembling as they touched the basket, then slowly peeled back the thick blanket. A tiny face appeared, eyes tightly shut, a flat little nose, lips rosy as wildflower petals. The baby slept soundly, despite the bitter cold outside skin, soft as a secret, guarded by the ancient forest. A surge of emotions flooded the rancher's heart, a confusing mix of shock, bewilderment, and nameless fear. He had grown used to solitude, immersed in quiet days, but now before him was a fragile little life, utterly strange and vulnerable, arriving straight from a story he never thought could be real. He looked around. The pine trees stood still beneath the thick mist, as if the whole forest were silently watching this moment with eerie reverence. The giant footprints led deep into the woods, a silent invitation, or perhaps a warning not to be ignored. Gently, the rancher lifted the basket, feeling the warmth of the tiny body inside. His heart pounded fiercely, each beat echoing like a distant drum across the endless wilderness. Part of him wanted to run, to flee from the inexplicable. But another part, weaker and more fragile, urged him to stay, to accept, and to protect. He wondered quietly, how did a baby come here? From where and why me? Years of loneliness suddenly overflowed with unanswered questions, stretching his heart across a vast, silent void. The rancher placed the wicker basket inside, where the fireplace's glow flickered softly against the aged wooden walls. The baby lay still, breathing evenly, tiny hands trembling beneath the thick blanket. He sat beside her, gazing intently at the small face, unable to hide the worry rising within. Old wounds inside him softened, replaced by a heavy but warm responsibility to guard this fragile life amid a wild and dangerous world. A rough piece of animal hide was tucked inside the basket, a silent message, perhaps a gift or a challenge from the mysterious world beyond. The rancher held it carefully, his calloused hands stroking the crude stitches as thoughts without names filled his mind. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows around the small room. He reflected on years spent alone, long, silent nights filled only with the wind and the soft murmur of the creek. Now beside him lay a tiny soul, a question bigger than any tale he had ever heard or told beside the fire. He glanced out the window where the mist hung thick over the vast forest. A low growl echoed in the distance, different from any animal he knew. The sound was charged with power and mystery. Inside, the baby stirred soft cries drifting through the quiet room. The rancher bent down, holding her close, an unspoken promise sent with the embrace. No matter what the world held, he would not let anything harm this fragile life. Have you ever felt a moment so profound? It changes your whole life, even when you don't know where it will lead. The night had not yet fallen. The mist had not yet lifted, and the story of the rancher and the baby had just begun. By the flickering firelight amidst the cold wilderness, they were two lost souls finding each other to fight the loneliness and trials fate had laid before them. Can you hear the beating of their hearts? The whisper of those who choose to step into the unexplainable, to live and to love even in silence and mystery. The rancher sat quietly in the corner of the room, the firelight casting soft shadows across his weathered face, marked by time and secrets no one else knew. Outside the window, the wind whispered through the ancient forest, reminding him of lonely years gone by, when each day passed like a long, colorless chain of monotony. But now, inside this warm room, there was a different breath, a tiny one, fragile yet strangely strong. He placed a hand over his chest where old scars still lingered on his heart, and for the first time in many years, he felt a new rhythm, a hope never before known. The wicker basket remained where it had been left, a magical mark, between a harsh, cold world and something miraculous. The rancher glanced down at the large footprint pressed deep in the snow, the trace of a creature told only in stories whispered by campfires in the dead of night. He didn't know if it was a gift or a curse. But in that moment, one thing was clear: his life had been rewritten with a new stroke, mysterious and sacred. Can you imagine the feelings of a man living alone in the vast wilderness, suddenly entrusted with a fragile new life, a mix of surprise, fear, and awakening from a long spiritual slumber? Picture his eyes filled with years of solitude, now glowing with a warm, gentle fire, full of quiet responsibility. This is a story about life, about hope, about kindness found where it's least expected. Beyond the window, the pines stood still, silent and steadfast, bearing witness to this moment that changed a destiny. The wind rustled through the branches, carrying the warmth of a spring not yet arrived, but already beginning inside a man's heart. The rancher sat beside the baby, his rough hands suddenly gentle like the tender branches swaying in the breeze. He knew from this moment on life would never be the same. And though mysteries still lay ahead, he was ready to face them even if loneliness was no longer his enemy. Have you ever heard a story about a fateful encounter when a fragile soul steps into your life without warning, yet changes everything forever? Let this moment pass quietly. Listen to the breath of the ancient woods and the warmth of human kindness spreading through the stillness. Just one night was enough to write a story that will never fade, the story of the rancher, the baby, and the legendary footprints left in the snow. Outside, the heavy gray sky pressed down over the pine forest, as if all of nature itself was keeping a secret alongside him. Beneath his feet, the cold snow still held those massive footprints, traces of something beyond explanation. The rancher closed his eyes softly and took a deep breath, not to shake off the biting cold creeping into his bones, but to feel the life trembling in the palm of his hand. It had been so long since he'd touched the softness of a child's skin, or heard a cry that could awaken a parched soul. The baby stirred lightly, the small cries fading into soft sighs, as if saying, "You're the first one I trust." The rancher looked down at the fragile little face, every delicate feature stirring an unusual tenderness within him, the tenderness of a man who had lost everything, now finding meaning in a tiny, miraculous life. He gently stroked the fine hair and whispered, "I'll keep you safe, here with me." Those words weren't a grand vow, but a quiet promise buried deep inside a heart hardened by years. Outside, the wind fell silent for a moment, as if listening to a story just beginning. The trees whispered, rippling through the thick mist that veiled all the unknowns ahead. The rancher laid the baby on the worn bed, covering her with a soft blanket, then sat beside her eyes, gazing far into the depths of the forest. A low fear simmered inside what dangers might the baby's arrival bring, but alongside it a strange faith that his life was being rewritten by forces greater than himself. Have you ever felt in a sudden moment life open a new door you dared not step through? There he stood between flickering firelight and dense fog, deciding not to turn away. He knew not everyone is given the chance to feel human warmth again, to step out of their own darkness. And you, the one listening to this story, are you ready to open your heart to unexpected miracles? Outside the door, the large footprints remained silent reminders of mysteries still untold. The rancher bowed his head, hands still gripping the rough piece of animal hide, the gift or message from that unknown stranger. He knew from this moment on, life would never be the same. Years of loneliness would give way to new responsibility, and perhaps to a silent love that runs deeper than words. The night deepened, the fire flickering like slow, steady heartbeats within the small room. The rancher sat beside the worn bed, watching the baby sleep peacefully, her steady breath a new rhythm weaving softly into his soul. He recalled the long, endless days filled only with wind, snow, and the murmuring creek like a sorrowful song without end. Now that silence was broken by gentle breaths and faint cries, sounds of hope and life itself. Suddenly, he lifted his head toward the window where pale moonlight filtered through the mist. Outside, the ancient forest lay quiet, but the giant footprints in the snow remained a silent vow, a presence beyond all understanding. He wondered, had the legendary creature chosen him to carry a trust? Was this a chance to heal the wounds he'd carried for years? Gently, the rancher touched the baby's tiny face, feeling warmth spreading through his calloused fingers. He sensed an unspoken bond, a bridge between the human world and nature's deepest mysteries. In that moment, his heart filled with a quiet, profound emotion, protection, reverence, and a love just beginning to grow. You listening to this story, have you ever felt a moment when something unexpected beyond your control became a source of strength and inspiration? There are encounters without words, without explanation, only understanding through eyes and heart. Like the rancher, he didn't need to know why, only that he would never let go. On the snow-covered wooden steps, the giant footprints remained clear and bold. A strange story begins here in the stillness of the mountains, amid the biting cold and years of solitude. And are you ready to embrace such a mystery, to realize that even in the deepest darkness, there is always a small flame burning quietly, the flame of faith and human kindness? Part 2. The decision to hold on. The warm glow from the small fireplace flickered softly, casting dancing shadows on the aged wooden walls like silent spirits watching over the house. The rancher sat on an old wooden chair, cradling the baby in his arms. His rough fingers traced gently over the soft skin, as if afraid even the lightest touch might harm the fragile life before him. Soft cries drifted through the cozy room, echoing within a heart long unused to feeling. He said nothing but looked deeply into the baby's closed eyes, searching for a sign. A silent answer to the question that tore at his soul. Why would a legendary creature leave this child with him, a lonely man deep in the wilderness? In the stillness, the rancher felt each steady breath, each small heartbeat echoing like a gentle melody amid a chaotic world. The pain of lost loneliness and hardened defenses seemed to melt away, blending into a fierce urge to protect and shelter. He kissed the child's forehead softly, and in that moment, the invisible walls built around his weathered heart over many years began to crumble. Whispering like the forest wind, he said, "I won't let you go. I will keep you." The wicker basket was placed carefully in a corner beyond the reach of the firelight. He pulled a thicker blanket over the baby, warmth filling the small space. The rancher sat there, eyes lifted to the cracked wooden wall bearing the marks of survival through countless blizzards and endless winters. Now that wall witnessed a different story, one of life and hope blossoming amid solitude. He recalled long nights spent listening to the wind howl through cracks in the door, the cold seeping deep into his bones. Loneliness had been a wild beast lurking and twisting his heart, but now beside him was not empty silence, but the breath of a tiny soul, weak cries filled with strength awakening a sleeping heart. Quietly, the rancher stood and moved to the kitchen, fetching warm water to prepare milk for the baby. Every careful motion was a reminder of life passing by each moment, a call to the growing responsibility and love within. He wondered, had the legendary creature placed its trust in him, the only one here who could shield the child from a cruel world? You listening to this story, do you know? Sometimes life leads us to crossroads beyond our choosing, and courage is not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. There, the rancher stood, a quiet man aged by time and trials, now forced to open his heart to embrace the uncertainty of fate, and to choose to hold on to a tiny life no one knew where it came from. The fire burned steadily, its light dancing on the worn wooden walls, telling the tale of survivors and hearts that never let go. The rancher returned to the baby, lifting her gently, cradling as if holding the whole world in his rough hands. The crying softened to gentle breaths, a small symphony of life amid cold winter days. Have you ever heard stories where just one moment changes everything? A moment when the most closed heart opens and love begins to bloom in the deepest places. This is the rancher's story. Years of solitude now giving way to the journey of fatherhood with all its reverence, pain, and hope. The wind howled outside, but in that small room an invisible warmth covered every wound, every sorrow. That fragile life was not just a baby, it was a miracle, a reminder that even in the deep forest and quiet wilderness, love, faith, and sacred connection can grow. Can you feel it there beyond the screen? A man with his own courage deciding to hold on to a part of life he thought was lost forever. A silent promise needing no words, just the gaze upon a child in the dark, a protection that cannot be shaken. And you ever made a decision that changed your whole life in one quiet moment? The rancher bowed his head, gazing down at the baby peacefully asleep, her small eyes half closed, as if dreaming of another world, one without gunfire, biting winds, or loneliness. He remembered the days before when this cabin was nothing but a solitary refuge for a steadfast man, constantly battling both himself and the harsh wilderness. Now everything had changed, not by his choice, but because fate had entrusted him with a greater mission, to become the guardian of this fragile life deep within the ancient forest. Gently, he covered the baby with a blanket, his fingers trembling as if afraid to harm the one thing left in his life. In that moment, old wounds and years of painful loss seemed to heal bit by bit, warmed by the invisible tide of love swelling within his heart. The rancher closed his eyes and whispered, "I will never leave you alone." The fire flickered in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the weathered wooden walls. The only sounds were the baby's steady breaths and the wind outside the window, a quiet symphony of life and nature. He looked out toward the snow where the giant footprints remained deeply etched, silent reminders that some things lie beyond human understanding and control. Have you ever felt a profound change within you sparked by a gentle touch or a single glance? The rancher, once numb to emotion, was now awakened by a tender power he could not resist. Love needed no vows or grand declarations. It only required a heart willing to see and a soul willing to stay. He rose and went to the kitchen to fetch a warm cloth, gently wiping the baby's face. A simple act, yet filled with a world of longing, a quiet determination never to abandon. He thought of Bigfoot, the legendary creature that had left this child perhaps watching from afar, entrusting its faith in a man no one expected. In that cold, lonely moment, the rancher realized life doesn't always give us choices, but it gives us the strength to face what comes. And from here, a new journey began, not just for the baby, but for the man who had once lost faith and was now finding himself again through those tiny eyes. You listening to this story, do you see the light in the darkness? Can you see that even in the coldest places, love, hope, and miraculous connections can still bloom? And the rancher, he's no grand hero, just an ordinary man who chose to stand up and hold on. The night deepened, the wind still howling through the cracks, but inside the cabin, warmth rose, the warmth of love, of life, and of a decision that could not be undone. The rancher held the baby, close eyes lifted to the flickering fire, and for the first time in many years, he saw a future uncertain yet filled with light. The rancher sat by the fire, its flickering glow casting light across his rugged face lined with deep wrinkles, the marks of time and a hard life. The baby slept peacefully, tiny hands curling and uncurling, as if dreaming of some distant, gentle place. He sighed softly, a wave of emotions rising within him, feelings too complex for words. For years he had buried his desires, his hopes, and the wounds deep within his soul. Now a fragile life carried warmth, faith, and responsibility, a harsh yet sweet miracle poured into his world. The rancher looked around the room, each scratch on the wood, every crack in the window witnesses to a silent transformation. He was no longer a man alone. A soft sigh filled the quiet space as if whispering, "I won't abandon you no matter the trials ahead." Have you ever stood at the threshold of a life-changing choice where heart and mind wage a fierce battle? Where the decision is not just for yourself, but for another small life? The rancher stood at that crossroads between fear and hope, loneliness and love, leaving behind and stepping forward. He didn't know if Bigfoot would return, if the baby would be safe, or if life would allow him to hold on to this precious gift. But in this moment, he chose a path of care, of perseverance, of quiet yet fierce love. The fire dwindled to glowing embers. The rancher smiled softly for the first time in many years. A simple smile needing no explanation, just a small sign of faith and love. Can you feel the power of a choice? A choice that promises no perfection, but holds fast to the most precious things in life. The rancher chose to hold on, not because he had all the answers, but because he had the courage to embrace the unknown. Outside the cabin, the fog remained thick. Inside, a small flame flickered, not just a fire to warm the cold, but the light of an awakened heart. And the story of the rancher and the baby, the bond between man and legend, continued to spread through the darkness like the whispered secrets of the ancient woods. Part 3. The Threat Emerges. Late afternoon's fading light cast long, hazy shadows across the ranch while the wind rustled through the pine branches, whispering warnings of ill tidings. A distant bark pierced the quiet, echoing into the wooden cabin and breaking the long-held stillness. The rancher startled, a sharp flicker of anxiety flashing in his eyes, an unease he tried to bury deep within. Heavy footsteps thudded on the wooden floor as he moved toward the door, peering outside. A group of men clad in thick coats and faces cold as ice slowly approached the ranch, their expressions hard-marked by unwavering vigilance and determination. The hunters stopped at the gate, their sharp eyes scanning the wooden walls. No detail escaped their watchful gaze. They exchanged low, cryptic words, hunting for something far more valuable than mere life. The rancher knew them well. Bigfoot hunters chasing the legendary creature he had once believed was nothing more than a campfire tale. But now, with a secret safely hidden inside the cabin, he felt the danger creeping closer with every step. The wooden door swung open and the rancher stepped out, his voice calm, though his eyes betrayed tension. "What are you looking for?" One of the men stepped forward, eyes probing, voice cold. "We heard strange growls last night. Did anyone see anything?" The question struck like a blade, an unspoken challenge that his secret might be uncovered at any moment. The rancher steadied himself, gaze firm, voice low but resolute. "I heard nothing. I saw nothing." The hunters exchanged doubtful glances, but lacked the proof to search further. Tension hung thick between them, each passing second a sharper threat to the rancher's hidden truth. Inside the cabin, the baby slept peacefully, unaware of the danger lurking outside. The rancher turned back inside his chest, tightening with nameless worry. He knew that if discovered, the baby would no longer be safe, and the secret would no longer be his alone. Have you ever felt a suffocating fear when a precious secret is under threat? When the things you hold in your heart could be taken away at any moment? The rancher, once accustomed to solitude and cold, now fought for something more precious than life itself, the love and survival of a tiny soul. The pale light of dusk surrendered to the encroaching darkness. The hunters left, leaving behind silence and a lingering unease within the rancher's heart. He stood at the door, watching their figures disappear beyond the pines, knowing that peaceful days were now fragile and easily shattered. From this moment on, every sound, every shadow in the night could be a threat. The rancher strained to listen, ready to stand and protect the baby with his very life, even if it meant facing the dangerous world beyond. Have you ever felt your heart race wildly over a secret you cannot share? A secret so precious that the fear of losing it overwhelms you? Imagine the rancher's loneliness now, not just the solitude of one man, but the burden of guarding an entire small world. And despite the dangers lurking outside, the rancher knew one thing he would not let go. Because love needs no vows, no grand declarations, just the quiet promise, I see you and I am here. The darkness stretched a few more steps, but the rancher remained rooted in place, his eyes fixed on the hazy path where the hunters had just vanished. A cold wind whipped through the gaps in his coat, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying pine, the smell of a wild forest, both cold and mysterious. He heard his heart pounding fast, each beat a warning of the difficult days ahead. Safety was no longer a given, but something to be fought for inch by inch. Inside the cabin, the rancher carefully laid the baby on the wooden bed, gazing at the small face, eyes tightly shut, lips moving softly, as if dreaming peaceful dreams. He wondered if he could protect her from the cruel world outside, where curiosity, cruelty, and merciless hunters showed no mercy. Can you feel the weight in the rancher's soul? The weight of responsibility, of fear, but also the power of love that breaks every boundary. He stood there wrapped in the cloak of night and mist, determined to hold on to what was most precious, no matter the dangers. A dog barked again, this time closer, a signal that a new challenge was near. The rancher quickly pulled the blanket tight around the baby, then stepped outside, eyes piercing through every leaf and shadow. He knew this was no longer the peaceful life he once had. It was a battle, a quiet war to keep the secret and protect the baby's safety. Have you ever felt that peace is only temporary? That darkness always lurks, ready to tear apart the fragile veil of life? The rancher once believed he could live alone, isolated, undisturbed. But now he knew the truth was different. Inside him burned an unquenchable flame, the fire of protection, of love and responsibility. No matter the danger, no matter the pursuers, he would not let the baby fall into hands that could never understand his heart. Returning to the baby, he gently stroked her hair, as if whispering a silent vow. I will never leave you alone, no matter how vast the world may be. The wind outside echoed that vow, carrying the faith and resilience of a lonely man filled with kindness. You listening to this story, have you ever witnessed the quiet struggle between fear and hope? A battle not just for yourself, but for a small life, a fragile spark in the darkest night. Feel that resilience and walk on with the rancher through this wordless yet meaningful journey. The darkness slowly retreated, giving way to the first stars shimmering in the cold sky. The rancher sat by the window, eyes fixed on the distant forest, where giant footprints still lay deeply pressed in the snow. He knew the journey ahead would be long and full of trials, but he was no longer alone. And you listening to this story, if faced with such a challenge, what would you choose, to run away or to stand your ground, to give up or to keep going? The rancher chose to keep going, not because he was strong, but because he knew some things precious come only once in a lifetime and must be held with all your heart. The night deepened, the dog's barks grew faint, yet within the rancher, the unease lingered unchanged and pressing. He returned to the baby's side, his eyes shining with steadfast resolve, the fierce determination to protect the one thing left in his life. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering spots of light that danced along the old wooden ceiling. Those sparks were like tiny candles burning bravely through the stormy wilderness, carrying with them hope and life. He gently touched the baby's face, his rough hand tenderly stroking a delicate flower in the cold winter air. The soft breathing, the faint, wavering cries whispered a lullaby to his soul, soothing away his worries and fears. The rancher knew he was holding more than just a fragile life. He was holding faith, the belief that miracles still exist, no matter how harsh the world may be. Have you ever seen a hardened, cold man softened by a tiny, trusting gaze? The rancher was that man, once rejecting everything, now becoming a father, a silent protector. He didn't need grand words, only simple acts, keeping warm, feeding, soothing to sleep. Those humble acts carried deeper meaning than any vow spoken aloud. The lamp's glow painted long shadows of the rancher's face on the wooden wall. He sat there silent as a stone statue in the ancient forest, but inside him raged an ocean of emotions. Each breath of the baby was a new rhythm, a reason for him to rise each morning despite the dangers lurking. The wind howled through the window cracks, whispers of the old woods reminding him that the world outside was never truly safe. But inside that small room burned a flame that could not be extinguished, the flame of love, hope, and inner strength. The rancher had chosen not to give up. He chose to hold on to that tiny light, the light of a new life, a miracle amidst the harshness. You listening to this story, remember this. Sometimes what we fear most is what makes us grow the most. Sometimes in the deepest darkness, we find the brightest light. The rancher stood there amid fog and danger and made his choice, no turning back, no letting go. Outside, the night blanketed the forest, thick fog, deepening the shadows, making everything more blurred, mysterious, and haunting. The giant footprints in the snow gradually faded beneath the silver moonlight, a quiet reminder that Bigfoot's presence was not just a tale told by firesides, but a part of the reality the rancher was guarding in secret. He stepped outside, his gaze, distant and thoughtful, fixed on where the hunters had disappeared beyond the trees. He felt the ever-present danger surrounding himself and the baby, but he could not let go, could not allow that love to be stolen away. Inside the cabin, the fire flickered, casting the rancher's shadow against the cracked wooden walls, a symbol of a heart that had been wounded many times but never shattered completely. Beside him, the baby slept soundly, the living image of new life and undying hope. Have you ever felt caught between two worlds? One of safety and peace you once knew, and another of trials and lurking dangers. The rancher felt that too, but he chose to stay to fight for what mattered most. The wind still howled through the cracks like whispers from the ancient forest, telling stories of those who choose to face challenges instead of fleeing. The rancher had stepped onto that path, the path of silent love, of quiet protection. On the wall, their shadows merged in the firelight, an emblem of an unbreakable bond between man and life, between human and legend. You listening to this story, can you see the strength in the rancher's eyes? A quiet man, willing to protect love without words, without promises. And you, if you stood where he stands, would you hold on to what is precious in a world full of dangers? Would you dare face your fears to guard a part of your life? Life doesn't always offer easy choices, but it offers us the chance to rise, to choose the path of courage, love, and sacrifice. And the rancher, surrounded by warm firelight and encompassing darkness, chose to stay. He chose to hold on to a small miracle and to hold on to himself through that silent love. Part 4. Hiding the Truth. The biting cold wind howled through the ancient pines outside the ranch, swirling thick mist that cloaked every blade of grass and stretched over the snow-white yard. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the distant, hurried footsteps echoing faintly. Thomas stood firm before the old wooden door, his solid frame like a silent wall amid the darkness. In his hand, the flickering light of an oil lantern wavered through the dense fog. His heart pounded rapidly as if warning of an inevitable storm. Through the mist, the hunters appeared tall and cold, their eyes sharp with suspicion. One man stepped forward, voice harsh and steely. "We heard growls last night. Did you see anything unusual, tracks, or signs of anything?" Thomas remained silent for a long moment, then answered with a voice dry and cold as the frost outside, "No, I saw nothing, just wind and snow." The hunter's eyes probed deeper, trying to peer into the depths of his soul. But Thomas did not waver. He knew that a single truthful word could put the baby inside the cabin in irreparable danger. Tension thickened the cold air. The hunters said nothing more, but their gaze sought to strip away every secret. After a few minutes, they turned away, their horses' hoofbeats and dogs' barks fading into the night. Thomas sighed deeply, closing the wooden door behind him, his heart heavy with the unspoken burden of responsibility. Inside the cabin, the baby slept soundly in the wicker basket, her gentle, fragile breathing like a miracle amid the wild world. He knelt beside her fingers, softly brushing her delicate hair. Silent tears fell not from weakness, but from the weight of sacrifice and quiet love. On the old wooden table lay a roughly sewn piece of animal hide like a wordless letter. Thomas looked at it with reverence, understanding that it was not merely an object, but a bridge between him and the mysterious world beyond. Amid the howling wind and the snow-covered earth, Thomas silently vowed to protect the baby with his very life, with silence and unwavering resolve. Even if it meant solitude, even if he had to hide everything from the world, he would not let her fall into danger. The long night passed in suffocating quiet, yet filled with deep, silent love. He was the guardian, the steadfast wall shielding this fragile life amidst the storm of existence. Part 5. The quiet return night draped a thick veil of mist, soft silver wisps floating gently, covering the ranch blanketed in pure white snow. The moon's faint glow pierced through the haze, casting shimmering silver beams across each snowflake, awakening the scene in a mystical stillness. Thomas stood motionless on the porch, his hand resting lightly on the wicker basket, carefully wrapped around the baby in the corner. The biting cold bit through his skin, yet he did not move. This moment stretched endlessly, a silence profound, broken only by steady breaths and the faint beating of a heart. The baby slept soundly, her small rosy face nestled beneath warm blankets, unaware of the place she was being returned, to the legendary creature whispered about through generations. In the bone-chilling cold, the silent bond between Thomas and the baby formed an unshakable wall, no words needed, no brilliant light required, just a peaceful moment, heavy with trust and hope. Have you ever stood silently beside someone, no words spoken, just presence enough to make all feel safe? From the thick mist of the ancient forest, a giant figure slowly emerged, tall and mighty, cloaked in thick fur, its hooves touching the ground as softly as the sighs of nature itself. Thomas never took his eyes off the figure. He knew this was no ordinary creature, but a soul of the mountains, a legend buried deep in the earth and the memories of the native people. The creature stopped before the wicker basket, its deep, wordless eyes meeting Thomas's. No words were spoken, yet an unspoken understanding and silent connection bridged the human and the mysterious being. Gently, Thomas placed the basket on the ground and stepped back, respecting the distance and safety. The creature bowed its head slowly, as if offering thanks and reclaiming what was entrusted. Some moments in life render words unnecessary, replaced instead by a look of presence and profound respect. Have you ever experienced such a heavy silence where a single glance said it all? The Bigfoot stood silently massive yet gentle amid the thick mist cloaking the snowy earth. Moonlight filtered through the haze, illuminating the giant footprints left behind. Thomas gazed into those deep, mysterious eyes filled with distant emotions and unspoken bond, souls in harmony between human and nature's worlds. They remained still for minutes, breaths mingling with the wind whistling through the pines, a song of understanding and silent trust. Thomas felt the creature's deep gratitude and unutterable exchange. The baby was not just a fragile life, but a symbol of hope and the harmony between two worlds. The creature gently lifted the basket, glanced once more toward Thomas, then slowly stepped back into the mist. The soft crunch of hooves faded, blending with the wind and the ancient forest's whispers. Thomas stood frozen on the porch, his heart heavy with unspeakable emotions. Sorrow for the farewell, gratitude for the trust and hope that the baby would live, protected in a new world. Silence returned to the night, broken only by the baby's steady breaths and the quiet moonlight. Some moments cannot be put into words, they can only be felt with the heart. Have you ever experienced a moment where all understanding came from a look and silence? Share that feeling with me. Final part, an unforgettable mark. In the early dawn, the soft sunlight filtered through the pine branches, gently bathing the snow-covered ranch yard. The porch stood empty and still surprisingly quiet, save for a small, intricately carved wooden bracelet resting silently on the old wooden door handle. Thomas stepped inside, his rough hand slowly picking up the bracelet, as if holding a piece of the soul from the night before, from a story never fully told. He hung it beside the hearth, where the flickering flames once illuminated the little room, lighting an eternal flame within his heart. Though it was but a fleeting night, that moment had forever changed him, leaving a deep, wordless imprint. He whispered to himself, "Sometimes just one moment of daring to run into the fire to save a fragile life is enough to change two lives forever." Some things need no words. One brave act is all it takes to write a story for a lifetime. Have you ever dared to run into the fire to protect someone? Share your answer below. If this story touched you, please leave your thoughts and rating. And if you've ever chosen silence over revenge, comment, "I understand, Jonas." Thank you for journeying with this tale. Until next time, where secrets are shared by flickering fires and the whispering wind of the wild woods.